What's happening, baby? It's your boy Indo, and I'm coming at you today with another one of these high on fantasy football specials brought to you by TAC Sports. Now, today, what we're going to be getting into are going to be 10 rules that you need to follow when drafting your fantasy football team to ensure success no matter how high you get during the draft. Now, rule number one is going to be draft based on value. Now, when you're looking at running backs, typically the running backs that you can count on from week to week to consistently put up points are going to be the most valuable entity in fantasy football, followed by the top scoring wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, leaving the defenses and kickers for last. Just so you know, in 2019, only 27 running backs averaged at least 12 fantasy points per game, compared to the 39 wide receivers who did the same, 12 fantasy points per game. So there's a big difference in there, and running back value drops off very quickly. Consistent running backs, set it and forget it type running backs that you can kind of just put in, forget about them, and only really have to adjust them on their bye weeks or due to injuries. So you definitely want to stock up on running backs early, or your fantasy team stock is going to drop. Now, rule number two is going to be stock up on wide receivers very early. The second most important position in fantasy, like we just said, is going to be the wide receiver position. Running backs and wide receivers make up at least 4 of the 9 active roster spots that you have in a standard league, and super flex leagues and things like that. Things change, but in a standard league, it's going to be 4 of your 9 roster spots taken by the running back and the wide receiver position. So you definitely want to fill these 2 spots before moving on. Rule number 3, and I cannot stress this one enough, it should damn near be rule number 1, is be patient at quarterback. Let's run back to rule number 1, draft based on value. That's the simple explanation of quarterbacks right there. 23 quarterbacks in 2019 averaged at least 15 points per game. There's only 10 players in a standard league, and that's 23 quarterbacks. Of the 20 players that appeared on the most championship fantasy football rosters last year, only 2 of them were quarterbacks, and I can almost guarantee you that you can guess the 2, Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. You can win with a Patrick Mahomes or a Lamar Jackson, but you can also win with a Daniel Jones or a Big Ben Roethlisberger. Rule number 4 is going to be to draft tight ends on the back end. After the top 4 tight ends, let's be honest, production absolutely just falls off of a cliff. The depth at this position makes the next dozen or so tight ends fairly interchangeable. So you don't need to worry if you don't get one of those first 4 guys. You can definitely stock up on a nice tight end later in the draft, and if he doesn't work out, you'll always be able to pick one up off the waiver wire. Rule number 5, going back into rule number 1, draft based on value, is defense does not win championships. Just in a basic sense, the number 1 rated defense last year, the Chicago Bears, was drafted in 75% of fantasy football leagues, and they finished as the 16th best defense in the league. And the number 1 finishing defense, that very stout 49ers defense league last year, was only drafted in 3.5% of leagues last year. So you definitely don't want to jump on defense early. Do not be that guy or that girl in your league that jumps on defense early and ends up looking like a fool. Now we're looking at rule number 6. That one is going to be upside matters late. And that one's a very key one to remember as well, because finding breakout players late in your draft can win you leagues. DJ Chark, Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, and A.J. Brown last year were undrafted in 90% of leagues. And those were 3 breakout players last year that had a huge impact on teams that won their leagues. You definitely want to look to young players that have a lot of playing time to kind of complement on your looking for upside. Whenever you're looking at that upside, that's how you're going to find it. Like I said, those young players, like I said, DJ Chark, Scary Terry, they played in over 75% of the offensive snaps last year, undrafted in 90% of the leagues. So pay attention for that upside. Number 7 is going to be who to draft and who to back up. A lot of people kind of jump up on quarterback and tight end backups because in a standard league, quarterbacks and tight ends are only starting in one position every week. They only make up one starting spot each. Now, when it comes to quarterbacks, I wouldn't draft a backup quarterback when I have a Patrick Mahomes or a Lamar or even a Dak Prescott or Russell Wilson. Typically, when you have that set it and forget it type quarterback, you don't really need the backup quarterback until the bye week comes up. But I would go ahead and draft a backup when you're looking at the back half of quarterbacks, especially if you're looking at a quarterback like a Joe Burrow, who has a lot of upside. You're not quite sure how he's going to be playing. That's why he's going undrafted in most leagues right now. And it's definitely worth taking a chance and storing him on your roster if you're feeling something good about him. Now, tight ends, I definitely would not draft a backup tight end in whatsoever. Just like I said in the last rule, the amount of tight ends that are in the league make it almost interchangeable. You can go out on the waiver wire at almost any moment and pick up a good tight end to back up your tight end if you need to, or you need to change out tight ends. And that's actually going to lead me into the next rule, which is going to be know the lingo. You can definitely master your fantasy football league by mastering just a couple terms, such as the handcuff, which is another one that you would want to back up. Now, the fantasy football dictionary is going to present the handcuff as drafting the backup to a valuable player as insurance for that player, i.e. a Tony Pollard, a player that if something were to happen to the player above them, they would instantly have top 20 value in their position. If anything were to happen to Ezekiel Elliott, knock on wood, God forbid, Tony Pollard would instantly become a starting running back behind that stout offensive line that the Dallas Cowboys have, and he would instantly put up number one, low end number one, high end number two running back production. Another one that you might want to look at is streaming. The fantasy football dictionary is going to present streaming as using a bench or a waiver wire spot as a starter due to a favorable matchup. Now, successful managers will stream quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses, and kickers all season long and find success with that. So you definitely want to be looking at those favorable matchups. When I'm looking at a defense, I'm looking at a defense that's going to be playing a bad offense coming up, an offense that's not going to score very many points on them, that they're going to be able to, in a sense, tee off on. Now, going to the next rule of number 9, you might have even heard me mention it a couple times, is you really want to be mindful of those bye weeks. The bye weeks can be a deadly thing for you in the middle of the season, and that could be detrimental in a league where you're trying to win every week that you possibly can and score the most points that you possibly can and set the best lineup from week to week. And then the rule number 10, this is not going to be your final roster. The roster that you start with is not going to be the roster that you finish with. Due to trades, waiver wire fines, injury, your roster is going to change all season long. So you definitely want to keep that in mind, that you don't necessarily have to draft based on I'm going to keep this player all year long. You may even be just drafting a player just because you want them for the first couple weeks, like a Marlon Mack, who you think is still going to put up production early in the season and may lose their production later on. Now, I'd like to thank you guys so much again for tuning in to the High on Fantasy special brought to you by THC Sports. These were 10 rules that you need to remember when drafting your league, and it'll ensure you success no matter how high you get, no matter how drunk you get. Make sure you all tune in to my next episode coming out. I've got the running back special coming out, the quarterback special coming out, the draft strategy special coming out as well. So make sure you stay tuned. I'm going to make sure I make you a better fantasy football player, maybe even a stupider person when you tune into me. So thank y'all so much again for tuning in with me today. And don't forget, smoke them if you got them, baby. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Huddle Chat Sports Show. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at InnoIsMyNindo. And don't forget to hit that like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know about any debate ideas you have. And don't forget that notifications bell for future information about future episodes. And again, don't forget to hit one of these couple videos on your screen here. You guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you for your support. Stay blazing out there.